morning, church. Man, what a start to a good service, right? Woo! I love it. I love it. Well, my name is Becca. If we haven't met, I'm so happy to be bringing you this morning's message. You know, we're right in the middle of a sermon series about the fruit of the Spirit. And one of the things that we're doing, maybe differently than you've heard a sermon series about the fruit of the Spirit, is we're not really focusing much on the fruit, but we're focusing on how Paul instructs us to get the fruit in our lives. And so this morning, we're going to be going back to that beautiful passage that we've been reading together. And I'd like us just to do that this morning. Let's start off this way of just reading this beautiful 2 verses that we would love for everyone, every Christian to kind of commit to memory. And it starts like this. Everybody ready? All right. The fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Against such things there is no law. So Paul was writing this letter to a church community that, they wanted those things because those things really look like Christ. Like this man, this God-man that walked the earth, and when they looked at his ministry and they looked at his life, these were the attributes they saw, and they thought, that's our goal. Paul helped reshape kind of this conversation that really was sideways energy of how to get here, and he reintroduced them to what it's like to live life walking in the Spirit, because that is where God gets to transform us. And so, we see all these attributes, and sometimes even we run into them in this really broken world. And isn't it refreshing when you're due for a good dose of impatience, but instead someone gives you patience? Thank you. When you really deserve some unkindness maybe, but instead somebody is kind to you and faithful to you when you've been deceptive. And when we run into those things in the world, there's something healing that even happens to us, isn't there? So we want them. And so as a church, we're going to slow down. And we've been talking about some spiritual practices of how to walk with the Spirit so that these things might start to pour out of us. And what's beautiful is in Paul, in all of his beautiful teaching wisdom, he gave us a metaphor that we've been really having fun with. And the speaking team especially, we're sitting there and just finding all this beautiful connection between gardening and what it looks like to grow these seeds of the fruit of the Spirit in our own lives. And I'm telling you, it's rich. When the scripture says that you can see evidence of God if you just go outside and look in nature and look at the systems that he put in place to grow things, we can see a connection in our own lives. And so we've been having fun pulling some of those ideas out for you and just kind of meditating on them. And so one of the things that we realize is that there can be a seed. There's a seeds in all of us. God's given them to us. They're inside of us. But sometimes does it feel like the stuff that's coming out of you is a little wimpy? There's a little seed that's just like sustaining you. It's like hanging on, but it's like, this is my zucchini, you know? Well, the first time I ever grew a garden, that was kind of the crop that came out of it. It was just kind of just like these little wormy strawberries, and just it was kind of wimpy. And I went to my dad, who's a really good gardener, and he said, well, are you using compost? I didn't know the theology of compost, and I wasn't aware of this. And he said, oh yeah, plants love compost. You need to start collecting all of your waste, your food scraps, and then you use that. You turn that into compost. You put that. Plants love it. Well, we did it. Let me show you. This was when my daughter was little. Look at the size of them. Look at the size of our zucchini. Like, our plants just loved them. They just ate them up, and we just saw this big growth of a harvest all of a sudden. And then I was hooked. I was like, I love compost. This is it. And so we're going to talk about the theology of compost today. Are you ready? All right. Well, it starts like this, and I have a little present for you. Are you ready? This week I've been collecting all of my food waste for you. And if you could get a good look at this, I got a lot of coffee grounds in here. That's my staple. I have a banana peel in here. I've got some scraps of garlic, some onion. I've got kale. I shouldn't have bought the Costco size of kale. I deeply regretted it. It turned in my fridge, and now it's in this bin. I have some French fries in here. I'm a little embarrassed about it, but I didn't finish them at least, and they went into the compost. I've got some parsley and some bits of apple. There's stuff growing in here. And would anyone like me to take this cellophane off so you can, no? Well, my teenagers let me know very enthusiastically this week that this really stunk up the place. So I put some film on it for you, but it's even kind of bubbling up, like something's happening in here. So I collected all of this for you. And I just wanted to take a look at it. What does it look like? My food waste for 1 week looks like this. And I want to acknowledge something right here from the start. I have garbage in my life. You have garbage in your life. We have waste in our lives, stuff that's unuseful to us, stuff that's really hindering us from being like who God created us to be. And the thing is that garbage is made up of a lot of things in our life. It's the raw deal that we were given just when we were born, just the cards we were dealt. And a lot of times it had to do with the stuff that the last generation didn't go through the compost pile and we got to deal with it, right? Like, it's not our fault. It's just what we were given. But in this also is just my own mistakes, my grief, my any kind of hardship, my trauma, the job loss, not finding my place in the world, this garbage that others have given me and garbage that I've made myself. And you're going to hear this term a lot, garbage, trash, that kind of stuff. And I just have to stop and make sure we're all on the same page here. You are not garbage or trash, right? Like, I am not garbage or trash. It's something outside of us, but it is something that affects us, right? So I just want to be really clear. As I'm saying this, I don't want our messages to get into our head that, like, are the bad things in our lives, they aren't who we are. But they do affect us, and they affect those around us, right? So stick with me in the analogy here. It's touchy to kind of talk about our own garbage, and so I'm going to be really easy with us right now, and we're going to talk about someone else's trash in their life, and then maybe we can ease into, like, examining our own life. Does that sound good? This is why we watch reality TV, right? Yeah, you watch, like, Super Nanny, and you're like, well, I'm not that bad. So I found a character that has a lot of stinky, smelly trash in their life, okay? And we're going to be looking way back in the Old Testament in the book of Genesis at a character named Joseph. And so Joseph, he had quite twists and turns in his life. And let me just give you just a brief little story about Joseph. He was born in a big family. He had many brothers, many brothers. And he was the favorite out of all the brothers. He got the special treatment. He also had a really unique relationship with God. He was able to interpret dreams, and he really walked closely with the Spirit. He could hear God as he translated dreams and really knew kind of the path that his life was on. He was a special kid. His dad recognized this in him, and he even gave him a really special gift, this beautiful coat made of many colors. And you know what Joseph did? He put it on, he flaunted it in front of his brothers. He's like, look what I got, look what Daddy got me. And he kind of boasted about it. And he also shared with his brothers, who already didn't really like him, that he had a dream that one day he'd be so powerful that his brothers would bow down to them. Really ticked him off. Really ticked him off. And his brothers actually kidnapped him in the middle of the night. They beat him up, and they sold him into slavery. I mean, this guy had some twists and turns in his life. And honestly, we can look right there and we can say, like, okay, like this guy, it's not looking good. The trajectory, all down here from me. I don't see a way forward. This is the worst it can get. But the deal is that Joseph experienced garbage in his life. Some that were just given to him. Some because of a system he was just born into. He was born into a system of hierarchy. He was born into a system where slavery existed, not his fault. And some he brought on himself, right? Yeah. So he's got a mixed bag here of where it all came from. And the same is the same for us. We have stuff that was our fault, stuff that was not our fault, but it's still stuff we have to deal with, right? It's still affecting us. And so I want to show you right now how God used this raw material of Joseph's life and how he transformed it. Right after Joseph was kidnapped, he was imprisoned. He was in proximity of some high working officials of Pharaoh's court. And eventually he got called up to Pharaoh's court to do some supernatural kind of this interpreting of dreams where he came and he told Pharaoh really clearly what God was telling him, that there was going to be a beautiful harvest for 7 years. They were going to be just bathing in food and all of the good things. But then there's going to be a period of 7 years of famine. And he really encouraged the king to kind of store up all the good stuff because they were going to go through some hardship. And wouldn't you know it, he was right. And all the other countries around them were really suffering. They didn't have this knowledge. But Pharaoh and in Egypt, they were thriving because they listened to this interpretation. And the Pharaoh was so impressed that he made Joseph, kind of gave them a position of power, where eventually people from other countries who were really struggling, they would go and they would give them their plea for food, and Joseph had to make the decision whether or not to give some of the food of the king's kingdom to these people or not. And one day, a group of men came in, and Joseph recognized them immediately. They were his brothers. They were his brothers who came in need of food, and they didn't recognize him. So they gave them his plea, and Joseph had a choice right now. But there was something that had been happening in his life. And through, like you'll see a process there if you go back and read this together, but ultimately, when you think of Joseph's life, don't you think that like, oh, he's going to give it to him now? I bet they're shaking in their boots. He's going to give it to him, and he deserves it. How they treated him, he deserves this. He should just put them in their place and deny them their food. But instead, a miracle happened. A miracle happened in his life, and he forgave his brothers. He not only gave them food to take home from their families, but eventually he invited their whole families to come up and to live in this prosperous land where he had some power and authority to protect them. And he said this line to his brothers. Read this. You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done. Isn't that beautiful? It's such a rich and powerful story, and I'm wondering if you've seen this kind of work happen in your own lives. I'm wondering if you've been in that seat where all of a sudden the stuff that was just icky in your life, that there was a process, and maybe you don't even understand it yourself, but it came out the other end, and you're able to look back on it and be like, oh man, what the world intended to harm me and to bring me down, God used it and transformed it, and now I am who I am, and I have a gift to give to the world. Well, I want to look at that process a little bit, because I think it could look a lot like compost. I think it could look a lot like this gardening analogy and this process. And I want to show you, in case you're not familiar, and I get it, I wasn't familiar with this process either, but here is the life cycle of compost. We start over here on the left where you see just this bin of it's this stuff. It's the stuff that you'd rather just get it out of your house. It's stinky, it's smelly, but You put it in the compost bin, and then what you see here is, it's hard to see in this little image, but there's little worms in there. There's this box keeps it nice and warm, and you'll go out there and turn it a little bit, and then you put it on the stuff that's growing in your life, the good seeds that are happening in your life, and then all of a sudden you have this bountiful harvest. That's what compost is. It's this beautiful cycle that can happen with your waste that actually turns into some kind of superfood. The fact is we're going to have garbage in our life. We are absolutely going to have trash in our life. In fact, Jesus even promised it, right? In this world, you will have trouble, right? We cannot expect to go through this life completely unharmed because we live here. There's some systems already in place that make it really hard to sometimes live here. And in Galatians 5, before he gives us the fruit of the Spirit, Paul tells this church in Galatia, and now the church in Court Street, he tells them that there's three ways to live. Ways to live. The way number one is entrenched in the law, almost kind of captivated by the law, where we get so caught up in following the rules to save ourselves that we don't want to even acknowledge where we have had a misstep or have had a failure. And sometimes we don't even know how to deal with the hurt of others, and we don't know how to deal with the hurts that just come with life. And for fear of what, kind of how we deal with this is we start to judge the systems and the other people in our world. We get very judgy, and then we realize, I gotta hide the bad stuff in my life because I might be measured by that same judgment, right? So the trick is if you're gonna live in the law, you've gotta be good at hiding it. You gotta be good at just stuffing it away, carrying it around, putting extra celery on so you can try not to, but just, it gets heavy over time, but you gotta hide it, and you gotta just stuff it, and you gotta, if you're gonna live by the law, all of a sudden you start to see it gets really hard. It gets really hard to carry around your stuff. And I'll promise you this, because I've lived here, so I'll just be really honest. You can hide and stuff it, but the people you love the most, it's going to leak out. It's going to start to stink. It's going to be really difficult to always keep that hidden. But it's a choice we have. We can live by the law. And we can white knuckle it sometimes and even try to change. I just need to work harder, and I need to be better. And as you're dragging this stuff around and it's getting heavy, and then we read about stuff like freedom in Christ, and you're like, I don't even know how that stuff works. This stuff that I'm carrying around is so heavy. And honestly, in our shame, we hide it when we're living in the law. There's a second way that Paul says that we can live, and that is to live in the flesh. And Josh gave us this wonderful definition of what it's like to live in the flesh, and it's a intrinsic value of self-centeredness. I think I got that sort of right? It's a self-centered way to live where you rule your universe, you are the top dog, you are the priority, and you can live like that. And then the hard stuff in your life, it starts to just become your identity, right? And you're just like, this is who I am. You can take it or you can leave it. And in our pride, we just say like, deal with it, people. This is who I am. And then you go around life like a tornado, and there's this wrath of destruction in your past. Either you know what that feels like to be that, or you have been in the path of somebody's tornado, right? Like, we understand what it's like to feel like, I don't have to deal with it. I'm just going to display it. And you know what we do with our garbage? We fling it on people. We don't want it in our lives. You can take my garbage. You can take my garbage. And here's the thing is, these two ways of living, I've lived in both. I've cycled through them both, where I've been like, I think this is just how I'm supposed to be. No, I'm not. I got to work harder. No, I think this is just the way I'm supposed to be. No, I got to work hard. Like, I've done that little roller coaster a few times in my life. Anybody else been on that fun ride? It's a super fun ride. All right. Or there's a third way. There's a third way that Paul is really trying to invite us into. Because the truth is that Jesus didn't die so that we can hide things more effectively. And he didn't die so that we could be proud of the things in our life that are out of alignment or opposite of the fruit of the Spirit, if you want to know what that is. What does out of alignment look like? Well, it looks like hate. And it looks like criticizing. And it looks like fighting. And it looks like being impatient. And it looks like feeling and being untrustworthy and impulsive. Just do the opposite of the fruit of the Spirit, and that's what it looks like to be misaligned. And I'll tell you, you can get to that place by living in the law better way. And he says, what if it were possible to build and to pile up the unusable and the ugly for God to transform? What if it was possible? And it's possible by living and walking and being transformed by the Spirit. Paul invites us to partner with the Spirit of God wherever we're at in life. And not just bring the tidy parts to God, the parts that you're already good at, the parts that I'm a people person, so I'm going to bring that to God. No, all of it. He wants all the little bits and pieces of you, including the hard stuff. God wants the stuff that are living as secrets inside of us, all the things we use to protect ourselves and to grow our own kingdom. And he wants to use it kind of like compost. I want to give you this quote from a leadership book that I read. A compost pile is not just a fancy name for a mini garbage dump. It's the first stage in the process of rebirth for organic items no longer useful in their present state of existence. Now hang your hats on this one. Are you ready? The place for garbage with a bright future. Isn't that good? So here's our spiritual practice that I want to give you. I want you to reframe the stuff in your life that you see as garbage. And I want us to go on a journey with the Spirit of how do we take these things and create a place for the garbage with a bright future. How do we see it that way? How do we handle it? And so I want to give you something it's not formulaic necessarily, but I did see some 3 clear things that might need to happen for this process. So take this or leave this. This is what I got. Here I got. Ephesians. I'm going to take you to Ephesians. This is another great book that Paul wrote. And he loves this process, so it comes out in all of his letters. You can find it in Romans. You can find it all over the place. But let me read this here in Ephesians for you. Do we have that one? All right. Take no part in the unfruitful works of darkness. Okay, so here's bringing up this idea of fruit in our lives. Take no part in the unfruitful works of darkness, but instead expose them. For at one time you were darkness, but now you are light in the Lord. Walk as children of the light, for the fruit of light is found in all that is good and right and true. And try to discern what is pleasing to the Lord. Take no part of the unfruitful works of darkness, but instead expose them. And then he says this, but when anything is exposed by the light, it becomes visible. For anything that becomes visible is light. Therefore, it says, awake, O sleeper, and arise from the dead, and Christ will shine on you. Look carefully then how you walk, not as unwise, but as wise. This is, right? Oh my gosh, there's just so many lines in here that I just want to pull apart and chew on and look at. But really, this first step, if you're taking notes here, is to have an internal honesty. And you can do this in many ways. This could be through a journaling process. This could be taking a long walk. However you think the best, and whatever position you find yourself, getting very honest with what is going on. What needs to go into the compost pile of my life. This is the first and really beautiful steps. But really, we put in the compost pile these rough cards that we were dealt. We put in the compost pile your failures, your mistakes, your harmful habits. We put them all in. And then we go on another journey with God. And we do step 2. Are you ready? With God's help, imagine a new story. Imagine a new story. This is so critical to even in the very beginning when it looks like this and it smells and it stinks, but you've gathered it all up. Imagine a new story. And ask yourself, how has this been a deterrent in my life? How can I leverage this with God's help to actually become an asset in my life? Give it some hope. Imagine a new story. What can God do with these unusable parts of my life? Paul wrote this letter to these brand new Christians. And something that I forget sometimes is that these brand new Christians, there were some in the mix, and especially Paul, that had witnessed the resurrection. There were actually still eyewitnesses around as he had been writing these letters. And if they hadn't seen it, they had known somebody that seen it, they had come to the church, some trusted people had told them, no, you don't understand, that God can make dead things alive again. This is what we celebrate. And it doesn't just happen at the end of our lives when we have the hope of heaven come. It happens now. It happens now as we surrender things to him. We can start to see these things that were a detriment to me, these things that were holding me back, these things that were given that I had no control over them, but I have to deal with them. I have to deal with them. God can bring those things back to life. And I ask you, what are the things in your life, if they were gone or dealt with properly? I want to throw up Galatians again here for you. What are the things that you hope for? For the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. What if these things were coming out of your life in bundles so that the whole world was just like you walked around and instead of like the stank, they were getting this stuff? I mean, that's something to hope for, right? So we start with acknowledging it. We start with some hope. And then I want to give you this slide because this is going to be the hope, right? This isn't part of your notes, but I think this should be written down. I love this. This is the spiritual practice for you. This season's garbage, if walked out with the Spirit, could be the compost that grows your next harvest. What if this was the way we started looking at the hard stuff in life? Doesn't mean that it's less hard, but it does give us hope, doesn't it? It is. It's maturing. That's exactly right. And so, how do we transform? Here's step number 3. This is a hard one. We include others. You know that verse that talks about it coming to life, getting out in the darkness. This is part of the process. Taking our compost pile and taking it out to the outside where the sun hits it. This is part of the process. And a lot of times, most of the time, we can't do it alone. And so I want to invite you to include others into this process. Mark did a beautiful job of talking about the spiritual discipline of community in your life. And this is part of it, is having a few trusted resources in your life that can help you walk through these hard seasons of your life. With the Spirit's help, take this to another helper. Work it out with a counselor. Work it out with a trained mentor. And the other resource I want to tell you about is Celebrate Recovery. Celebrate Recovery is a 12-step program, but it's for many, many things that are happening in your life. It's for your hurts, your habits, and your hang-ups. And we have several churches in the area that have these kinds of groups. And one of them is at one of our sister churches at Countryside Christian Church in Kaiser. And they meet every Tuesday from 6 to 8:30. And it is one of those places that are safe, that helps you walk through these very difficult things. I will promise you this, that people who have gone through 12-step programs in their life, I'm telling you, I want more of them in my life. Have you ever read a book from somebody who has done the work of like recovery, or has done that vulnerable work? Like I want to learn from them. I want them to be my friends. Like it is such beautiful, rich work that I'm very attracted to people who have done those kind of soul-searching, hard work when the compost has been transformed in their life. I'm telling you, you can sense them almost immediately. And I'm inviting us to do that work in ourselves. Even if you don't really know, like you're sitting here and you're like, I don't really think I have anything in my life. I would challenge you to ask the people closest to you if you're right. Because they'll tell you, they'll let you know. And then you're like, oh, okay, got it. Well, that's a humble step to take, but if you're really clueless about this, like ask somebody. And hopefully they're honest with you and they can share it with you. The compost process is one that takes some intention, doesn't it? There's this hopeful action that we participate in. When you take your raw and organic materials outside in this hot sun, and you turn it, and you look at it from all the angles, and you contemplate, how did this show up in my life? And you're thinking about that. What made me keep this in my life for so long? And you're germinating on that. And then this critical thing happens. Worms are attracted to it. I'm going to do something that might seem irreverent, but what if the worm is kind of like the Holy Spirit's action in our life, right? Like the worm wants to get in there. The worm is attracted to all parts of us, and it especially loves to work on this stuff, loves it. And if we allow it to, what happens? The worm eats it, and then it goes through its little body, and then it comes out as fertilizer, right? Right? Comes out as fertilizer, something, it's part of the transformation process, and I love that. It's part of it. And so I want to look at this again, and I want to inject some hope into it, because this smelly stuff that I would be tempted just to get it out of my house, with the work of the Spirit and the work of worms, it turns into something that looks like this. This is a jar of compost. This is a jar that once looked like this, and with a process, like this stuff is superfood. This stuff shows me that there was work done. This stuff says, and it wasn't just work, some of it was just magic, but I allowed it to happen. I gave it the right environment to make this happen. And now, in my garden, in my soul garden, this stuff is going to make those fruits of the Spirit just explode out of my life. And so, I just want to ask you this. What is the garbage in my life that I need to deal with? What is it? Because I'm going to tell you something, it's starting to stink. And it's getting really heavy. And there is a process of transformation that God is inviting you to. I'm going to end with one more verse. I know I took a long time. I knew I would. I had 13 pages to get through. But I want to end on one more verse here. This is James, the brother of Jesus. He says this, count it all joy, my brothers, and I'm going to add my souls, this process. For you know that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness, and then steadfastness having its full effect, that you might be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing. He knew about the process of compost in our lives. Let's pray together. God, this is good news. This is such good news that you restore us, that you partner with us to help restore the world. This is good news that Jesus wants to do this deep healing work in our lives. It's good news. And there's so many pieces, as I was even writing this, that I'm just ready and eager to put in the compost pile. So, Father, today as a church, we bring our whole story to you. We bring our whole lives, and we ask and we celebrate that God will make us new. Lead us and guide us to the help that we need. We trust you, God, to complete the work you've started in us. In Jesus, I pray, amen. You guys have a blessed week.